Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being here, distinguished state representatives, children, representatives from civil society. I'm very, very pleased to open today's site event in the framework of the high-level political forum. And this event will focus today on advancing towards meaningful inclusion of children in the Sustainable Development Goals accountability process from policy to practice. My name is Agnes Gracia. I'm a global advocacy advisor at Child Rights Connect, and I will be moderating today's event. And so before we begin, I would like to first begin by thanking Save the Children for co-organizing this event and for the support from the government offices of Sweden, the government of the Republic of Zambia, and the Joining Forces Coalition in El Salvador. And before we start, I have a few housekeeping rules that I would like to bring to all your attention. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and we will share the recording with all of you afterwards. And we can by recording the webinar, we can also share it with all those people that couldn't be here today with us. Then I also wanted to inform all of you that there are interpretation services available in English, French, and Spanish. And you can click in the globe icon that appears at the bottom of the Zoom screen and then select your preferred language. Our colleagues from interpretation services will also add all this information in the chat box. Then we invite all of you to type your name, the organization, and where you come from in the chat box, so we know from where are you all coming from. We know who's here today with us at this event. And finally, I also wanted to let you know that because we have children and adolescents here today with us, we want to make sure that this is a safe space for children and adults alike. So we invite you all to use non-technical language so we can all enjoy this event and follow what is being discussed. And then I also wanted to inform to you that we have a child participation and child safeguarding focal point. Her name is Wang Li. She is the person that you can contact if any concern arises during the event today. You can contact Wang Li. We will be posting her contact email in the chat box. And finally, we wanted to invite all of you to address any question that you may have during the event through the Q&A space in Zoom. And so please feel free to, when you're making a question through the Q&A, just briefly introduce yourself and write, what's your question and who you are addressing your question to. So we will try to answer your questions, but sometimes it's not possible to answer all your questions orally. So we will also be providing questions in writing to make sure that all questions are answered. So with all of this being said, we are delighted to see so many of you joining us today. It's great to have so many of you with us to joining us for this important dialogue to discuss children's meaningful participation in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and follow-up accountability processes. Today's event is also the 5th thematic launch of the How to Child Rights series. And in this context, we will be presenting 2 tools. For those of you that are not familiar with the How to Child Rights series, this is a series of practical tools, which can include, guidance notes, toolkits, or case studies. And these are developed by and for civil society in collaboration with academia and other practitioners, with the aim to inspire each other on how to apply a human rights-based approach in practice in our daily work, and to show how we can contribute actively in making legal and political commitments to children a reality. So the tools that we were presenting today, let me quickly show them to you. The first one is on how to use the voluntary national review to advance children's rights. And the second one is a case study from Zambia on how to prepare a child-led complementary report for voluntary national reviews. So our colleagues that are here today, the speakers that are joining us today, will be providing more information on this. Finally, just to mention that all these tools, you can access them on the Save the Children website, which is called Resource Center. we will also be posting in the chat the website. So you can find there all the information, and you will find as well the tools that we will be presenting today. So without further ado, I would like to turn to the speakers that are accompanying us today. As you will see, we have many experts with experience on SDGs implementation joining us. So we will begin first by hearing opening remarks. Then we will move to an interactive dialogue with children and adolescents that are joining us today. Then we will present the how-to tools that I just mentioned. And finally, we will hear closing remarks. So first of all, it's a pleasure to welcome Gwen Hines, Chief Executive Officer at Save the Children UK, to provide some opening remarks. Thank you so much, Gwen, for joining us. And I pass the floor to you. I think there is a problem with the audio. Voila. I thought it was interpretation, but not. Go ahead, Gwen.
No problem. Thank you so much, Agnes, and welcome to everybody to this fantastic event. And I look forward to having a really interesting discussion. I'd particularly like to thank the governments of Zambia and Sweden for their support for this work and their engagement in this work. But more important than that, I would like to thank the children and the young people who are joining us today to talk about these really important issues from El Salvador, from Ethiopia. And it's very important to hear your perspectives. And I hope you will challenge everybody if we drop into jargon, if we say things which don't make any sense to you, and especially where you disagree, because that's very much the point of today, is to have an open discussion. So why are we here? So every year since the world agreed the global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, there's been a process every year to review progress. Many of you know that, many of you have turned up every year to these discussions where countries have presented their own voluntary national reviews, or we've looked across the world. We're here today to talk particularly about the benefits and the importance of engaging children in these reviews and in these discussions. It's something that's very close to our heart as Save the Children and to our partners here working on child rights. It's also very much in the agreement agreed in 2015, yet it hasn't had the attention it deserves. Some people tell me it's too hard to talk to children. Children don't have anything to say. Children don't understand the issues. Children are annoying and troublemakers. This is wrong. Children have a lot of value to add to these discussions, and their perspectives are incredibly important for all of us to listen to and to learn from. And I hope today will demonstrate that. Today is also a good chance to share best practice, to share case studies of where it's worked and where it hasn't. And I'm delighted we're launching the how-to guide today. I would also like to stress to everybody that as we sit here in mid-2020, there are only 8 years left to achieve this ambitious agenda. I was there in 2015 when it was agreed. We knew it was ambitious, but we also knew it was very, very important. And there we talked very much about the targets in the global goals being things that we as the whole world had to sign up to. There are lots of targets, there are lots of indicators, but at the heart of these goals lies the idea that we need to balance people, planet, prosperity, peace. All these things matter, and we need to work in partnership. And definitely children and child participation is a key part of that partnership. Today, sadly, we're going backwards. Many areas like reducing the number of children who die before they reach 5, or the number of children in school getting a brilliant education have gone backwards due to the effects of the pandemic. This year, conflict and hunger issues in many areas are making it even harder to go backwards, and meaning that there's more and more discussion about it's too hard. We can't accept that, and I urge all of you to commit today that we cannot accept it's too hard to achieve the goals. We owe it to those we made these pledges to. We owe it to children and young people, especially when it comes to issues like climate change, because it's your future we're talking about. And many of us won't be here in 50, 70 years' time, but you will. And it's your future we're talking about. and you have a very important right and a voice in these discussions. So with that, let me thank you all and wish you a good discussion today. And we look forward very much today and into the future to working together on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wen, for setting today's tone for this discussion and for reminding us that there are only 8 years left and making this urging us to act now. So let's turn to our next speaker, Mr. Gabriel Wikström, who's the National Coordinator for the 2030 Agenda in Sweden. In his role, he worked to strengthen and promote and to deepen the implementation of the 2030 Agenda of different actors in society. And in particular, his work focuses on the perspective and participation of children and young people. So turning over to you, Mr. Wikström, thank you for being here today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Agnes. First of all, let me say how happy I am over the fact that we are devoting this time and energy to discuss one of the most important factors behind the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. I have been active in politics for more than a quarter of a decade. A big proportion of that time I have devoted to youth participation in politics, first as a child myself, and later on in the role as a youth leader and a minister. My urge has always been the firm belief that all people have the right to be not only heard, but also listened to and respected. But I'm also convinced that children and young people is a crucial force when it comes to focusing on the things that matter and spark real change in the world. Just during the last decade, we have witnessed examples of how children have made the world stop and listen to them and their ideas on how to form a common future. I'm thinking, of course, on Malala Yousafzai, record young Nobel Prize laureate, who brought the world's attention to girls' and women's right to education, and not only in words, but in firm action made us realize that women's rights are human rights. And here in Sweden, in my own country, we have the example of Greta Thunberg, who at the age of 15 started her Friday school strikes for climate, inspiring a global movement of young activists who fearlessly have confronted leaders all over the world on their inability to take action on climate change. Malala and Greta are two examples of children who have been able to move the global agenda and inspiring boys and girls all over the world to take action and make a difference. Because in the end, it is not these spectacular examples that change the world, but the struggle of the many million children and young people who are trying to make their lives and the ones of the friends and families a little better. This is also why it is so wrong to say, like many of us all too often tend to do, that children are important because they are the future. They are, of course, the future in the sense that they will live with the decisions we make today the longest, and therefore ought to be listened to and taken seriously. But children are foremost the present, living here and now in our own time with their unique experiences, capabilities, and wishes, and deserves in that sense to be part of this discussion and part of the decisions. In the spirit of being the change that we want to see, the Swedish government has, during the VNR process, tried to involve children and young people through special youth consultations in close collaboration with the National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations and the United Nations Association of Sweden. A survey was spread on social media in a campaign under the hashtag I Raised My Voice, and a special workshop was run with upper secondary school students from UNA certified UN schools. Young people involved in the UNA and young people involved in LSU's member organizations to discuss potential solutions to the challenges of global health, gender equality, global equity, and climate and biodiversity. I'm convinced that implementing the 2030 Agenda without involving children and young people just isn't possible. In fact, it is absolutely crucial that we find new ways to involve children and young people if we are going to have any chance at all to succeed in our aim to create a sustainable world. Thank you, and I'm looking very much forward to listen to what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it was great, to hear that, yes, children are the present and we need to find ways to involve them in decision making. And thank you for sharing the good practices that you have been implementing. Now we're going to move to Mr. Trevor Kaunda. He is the Permanent Secretary for Monitoring and Evaluation at the Ministry of Finance and National Planning in Zambia. Thank you so much, Mr. Kaunda, for being here with us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, for this opportunity to render our remarks. Madam Moderator, I wish to thank you for this opportunity to share some of the experiences of Zambia's voluntary national review. 2 years ago, the government conducted its first voluntary national review to review progress, identify areas for improvement, and introduce urgent policies and programs to accelerate the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. The development process included extensive consultations with line ministries and other stakeholders, with special attention paid to ensuring that inclusion of women, youth, children, and persons with disability. Senior citizens also actively participated in the consultations. This meeting may wish to appreciate that the civil society organizations, including the Save the Children, were actively involved in the Sustainable Development Goals awareness campaigns. And in this respect, the civil society organizations identified the Sustainable Development Goal targets that related to their mandate and contributed in raising awareness for specific SDGs. For instance, the Alliance for Accountability Advocate Zambia and its partner organization and its partners organized a national youth conference under the theme Engaging the Youth in Monitoring and Accountability for Sustainable Development Goals for a Sustainable Zambia. This conference was attended by over 200 youth from across the country. In addition, stakeholder engagements were aligned to the existing institutional structures and processes in order to achieve country ownership. As such, an SDGs guide was translated into 7 of the main local languages. You may wish to know that in Zambia, we have 72 languages, but the main ones are 7, and the guidelines were translated into the 7 main local languages to make it easier for the youth and children to appreciate the content. And in keeping with the principle of leaving no one behind, it may be recalled that during the presentation of the VNR report, the government shared the same platform with the civil society organizations who were represented by our very own Madam Precious Mulenga, a civil society child advocate. The government also participated in various activities coordinated by the civil society organizations, including in the validation of their shadow report. We were invited as government, and we appreciate that invitation and fully participated. It's also important to note that the civil society and children play a significant watchdog role in holding governments accountable for their 2030 agenda commitments to ensure that children thrive and live up to their full potential. Just a bit of context on Zambia's population structure. Madam Moderator, I'd like to indicate that Zambia's population is mainly composed of young people between the ages of 15 and 35. And so those below age 35 and below account for 82% of our population. Therefore, young people are affected by high unemployment rates, with approximately more than 1.2 million youth being unemployed. The transition rate to secondary and tertiary education is also low among young people, particularly the girl child. And these statistics present serious challenges which have been made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. And therefore, to redress some of these challenges, the government has implemented various policy and legislative interventions, which include the protection against discrimination on the basis of gender, political affiliation, ethnicity, and religion. And there are also other broad interventions that government has looked at to address the needs of the vulnerable in society, such as the expansion of the social protection programs, where we have the cash transfer and public welfare assistance scheme. And we also continue to subsidize agriculture inputs to vulnerable but viable small-scale farmers, aimed at increasing agriculture productivity and food security. This has also been critical, especially in the environment we're in, where we have the Ukraine war, which is affecting the global food supply chain. And in winding down, in terms of the lessons learned from the VNR, government has prioritized access and skills development in science, technology, and innovation. We've also introduced free education from pre-primary or creche or kindergarten to secondary education, aimed at increasing access to education, especially for children, for the girl child and other vulnerable children. And also, as a way of addressing the teacher-pupil ratio, government this year is on the path to recruit over 30,000 teachers, and also in terms of health workers, just to enhance or improve healthcare provision. Government this year will be recruiting some 11,200 health workers. And also at the sub-national level, what we call at the constituency level, government has this year increased allocations to the Constituency Development Fund, which is aimed at supporting the constituencies to come up with homegrown, localized solutions. And under this, there is a provision for secondary school bursaries and empowerment funds to vulnerable people who will be identified at the local level. We also have, starting last year with a change of administration, a ministry that is dedicated to the affairs of small and medium enterprises, which is aimed at supporting small businesses with a bias towards youth-led enterprises. And we're hoping that through this, we can see more opportunities being provided for the youth in our country. And in concluding, I'd just like to indicate that building on the foundation that has been laid with various stakeholder groups during the VNR preparation, I wish to call for an enhanced collaboration with civil society organizations, private sector, and cooperating partners in implementing SDGs relating to youth and children. Madam Moderator, I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing all these good practices in including children in consultations, in raising awareness, in translating documents into national language, and the advancements that you're doing at the national level. So this is extremely useful for us to learn and build on these practices. So thank you very much for all those opening remarks. I think it really helped us set the tone for today's event. And now I would like to move forward to move to the next section of our event today, which is to hear from the children that are joining us today and that are going to share their experiences. So we have today with us Arafat and Ikram from Ethiopia, and we also have Brenda and Oliver from El Salvador. And I would like to express a big thank you, because I know it's very late for some of you in Ethiopia, and also it's early in El Salvador. So we're very happy that you can be here with us and that you were flexible on joining us this late. So let's move on. We are going to hear now from them, all their experiences in participation in the development of a child-led complementary BNR report. And so they will share with us their views on the SDGs, on the importance of including children in the SDG process, on how to engage children in the BNR, and as well their experience in developing complementary reports. So let's now move first to our colleagues in Ethiopia. So we have Arafat, who's 17, and Ikram, who's 17, that are joining us. And I have some questions for you to kick off the discussion. So Arafat, the first question is for you. Why do the Sustainable Development Goals matter to you? Why do the SDGs matter to you? Thank you.
Thanks, Agnes. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Save the Children, member state representatives, and everyone for giving us the opportunity to share the views from Ethiopian children on the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Arafat, and with an Ikram. We are here represents all Ethiopian children who participated in the child-led BNR research. There are a few reasons why the Sustainable Development Goals are important for me. Number one, Sustainable Development Goals are important because the most goals are directly related to the United Nations Convention on the Right of Child, such as right to education, health, or nutrition. All of the goals are relevant to us and child-focused. And number two, based on our research, the Sustainable Development Goals are not just comprehensive, but also interdependent. This is important to note because children's rights are interdependent too. For example, you cannot achieve good health if you do not tackle poverty or hunger, gender inequality, or something like achieving peace. In the same way, children's right to health is linked to their right to be free from any discrimination and be protected from violence or different attacks. As a result, the solution to challenge set in the Sustainable Development Goals and the action to protect children's rights both require holistic approach across all the sectors. And number three, Sustainable Development Goals gives all countries clear and universal goal that they can work and enable governments and the stakeholders to address the need of children and communities by implementing target progress or programs. So far, we have noticed many initiations to help the communities across all the Sustainable Development Goals, especially on poverty, hunger, and health. Finally, Sustainable Development Goals give a standard indicator to know if child rights and needs are being met in country. And also that helps to keep government and the stakeholders be accountable to their promises and responsibility. So currently in Ethiopia, those efforts still fail to produce sustainable change and are still far from reaching the goal in Ethiopia. That's why one of the key recommendations to the government from our research should be achieve participation, community especially, encourage our children's, women, engagement and direct action in all programs and at all level, make more rapidly and a sustainable program. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arafat. That's extremely important, to think of the SDGs and the rights as interlinked and important to act on all of them. And thank you so much for sharing us some of the key recommendations from your report. Now let's turn to Ikram. So Ikram, I also have a question for you. So in your view, what particular groups of children are at risk of being left behind in SDG progress in your country? Which groups of children do you think that are at risk of being left behind?
Thanks, Agnes, and hi, everyone. My name is Ikram, and I'm grateful to be here today to share our perspective on the Sustainable Development Goals in Ethiopia. To respond to your question, one important finding in our research was that there are many groups of children at risk of being left behind in the SDG progress. And the initiatives implemented by governments and stakeholders have been inadequate to reach the most marginalized and created unequal progress across children groups, especially for children with disabilities, street children from mobile or pastoralized communities, and children in internally displaced communities. One of the reasons why this happened may be because standard children initiatives are often targeting children as a general group and not always taking into account age groups specific reality and needs. For example, the school feeding programs, sexual and reproductive health programs at schools are good bets. Many children in Ethiopia are out of school and not benefiting from these programs. Most of the services are not directly targeting these vulnerable groups. There is also lack of awareness in the community and by service providers to address their needs. These programs to promote health and increase access to health care in a village is good, but street children are not part of these communities and cannot benefit from this. That is why we have recommended that in addition to scaling up the current best practices like school feeding programs and community health programs, government and parents must ensure the most marginalized like children with disabilities, street children and internally displaced people to have access to basic services such as health, nutrition, education, and the likes. Improve access to nutritious food for the most vulnerable and expand supplementary feeding programs in areas and communities where it is most needed. Enforce laws to eliminate harmful traditional practices and gender inequalities, and ensuring child rights are protected ensuring child rights are protected even in situations of conflicts and emergencies. And also, finally, ensure that marginalized children or those most at risk of being left behind are included in the design, implementation, and evaluation of the SDG process, so they can ensure the programs are fit for them too. These all are my answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ikram. I mean, it's wonderful that you have this analysis in your report, and to be able to hear from your analysis and the work that you have been doing. Where do you see that children and different groups of children are being left behind, and especially when you were mentioning strict connected children, that this is a group that has difficulties in access services and are usually discriminated. So thank you as well for your concrete recommendations and solutions. I think this will be extremely useful in the VNR process of your country. So with all this information, now we're going to shift to the context in El Salvador, where we're going to hear from Brenda and Oliver. So first, we're going to hear from Brenda, who is 16 years old, and she's in the last years of her studies, and she's an activist and represents girls in El Salvador. So Brenda, I have a question for you. Why is it important for children and adolescents to have an opinion on the progress of the SDGs? Please, over to you.
Hola a todas y todos, es un gusto estar acá. Yo soy Brenda, soy representante de las niñas de El Salvador y también de mi grupo de consulta. Respondiendo a la pregunta, es importante porque damos a conocer que estamos al tanto de la existencia de los ODS, También porque somos nosotros quienes desde la infancia podemos generar grandes cambios para mejorar nuestro futuro desde lo que queremos y aspiramos, lo cual es un mundo mejor, lleno de oportunidades que nos permitan alcanzar nuestros sueños y metas. También queremos un mundo mejor, igualitario, que nos permita sentirnos libres y realizados. De igual forma, queremos y necesitamos que la voz de las niñas y los niños sean escuchadas y tomadas en cuenta, porque nosotros también podemos contribuir en el desarrollo de los ODS. Es por eso que damos nuestra opinión desde nuestras realidades vistas o vividas, tomando en cuenta las limitantes individuales y colectivas que tenemos. En espacios de participación, brindamos nuestras propuestas de solución que queremos que se fomenten y que se puedan poner en marcha para alinear esa deuda que se tiene todavía en nuestras comunidades, en nuestro país y en el mundo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Brenda. Muchísimas gracias. Thank you so much for reminding us that children's voices are needed and are important, and is the only way to advance SDGs implementation. So now we're going to turn over to Oliver. He's 12 years old and he's in the 7th grade of his studies. And I also have a question for you, Oliver. So as we all know, the SDGs seek to ensure that children's rights are fulfilled. Why do you think it is important that children's rights are fulfilled in this context, in the context of the SDGs? Over to you, Oliver.
Gracias, Agnes. Primero que todo, tengan todos un buen día. Mi nombre es Oliver. Soy un estudiante de 7º grado. Vivo en la comunidad de Cuyagualo, del municipio de Izalco, en el occidente de El Salvador. Formo parte de un grupo de adolescentes que reciben capacitaciones en el tema de liderazgo y derechos de la niñez por parte de Save the Children. Agradezco a las organizaciones por tomar en cuenta a la niñez de mi comunidad para participar en la consulta sobre el logro de los ODS en El Salvador. Agradezco la oportunidad que se me ha brindado de participar en un espacio de tan alto nivel como lo es este foro. Sé que es un espacio para que niños y niñas alcemos la voz y seamos escuchados por quienes toman las decisiones. Es muy importante que los líderes del mundo hagan valer los derechos de los niños y niñas para que podamos crecer con una buena salud, con educación de calidad, en un medio ambiente sano y crezcamos con nuestras familias y que seamos protegidos ante cualquier tipo de violencia. Pero igual de importante es que nosotros como niños, niñas y adolescentes tengamos voz y voto en la toma de decisiones que nos afectan directamente, sin importar nuestro sexo, color de piel, creencias o nuestra nacionalidad. Los niños y niñas queremos ser protagonistas de nuestro futuro y también de nuestro presente. Y esto podemos lograr solo a través de organización, de la formación y de la defensa de nuestros propios derechos. Como niño deseo crecer con derechos, vivir en una casa digna, ver ríos y mares limpios, tener oportunidades para ayudar a mi comunidad a salir de la pobreza, no ser discriminado, tener alimentación disponible. Quiero llegar a ser un adulto sano y preparado para los retos que el mundo me ponga. Las niñas y los niños muchas veces somos más vulnerables que los adultos. En los ODS veo que se busca superar a los problemas que más nos pueden estar afectando y me parece que una guía para lograr ese desarrollo que la humanidad busca. Confío en aquellos tomadores de decisiones, nos escuchen y tomen en cuenta a la hora de realizar cualquier acción. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Oliver. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for reminding us that you are the leaders of the present and the future, and that you will only be able to enjoy and claim your rights if you know them and you know how to use them. So thank you. With this, I want to give a big thank you to Arafat, Ikram, Brenda, and Oliver for sharing, your views today. We're going to hear more from you later on, but just a big thank you, for being here and sharing your voices and recommendations. So now we're going to turn over to the next section, and we're going to hear from Lily Cho, Senior Advisor, Inclusive Governance and Accountability to Children at Save the Children, and from Mary Chavula, Child Rights Governance Technical Specialist at Save the Children. And they will present the 2 new tools on how to use and on how to make use of the VNR process to advance child rights. So with this, Lily and Mary, I give you the floor.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the launch and the side event of these 2 new tools that we have developed as Save the Children, but also as part of working with so many wonderful partner organizations, some of whom are on the meeting today. So thank you very much. Essentially, these tools were developed by Save the Children to really promote sort of tried and tested approaches to sort of child rights work around the world, best practice around how we can better, use child rights programming. And this particular tool that I'm going to be speaking to today is titled How to Use the Voluntary National Review Process, which is essentially the SDG accountability cycle to advance children's rights. So my friends on the call, how can organizations use the SDG tool? The first there are kind of 4 things that we suggest here. And the first, essentially, this guide provides step-by-step information on a framework that we've developed called the SDG accountability cycle for your advocacy, not just at the national level where the VNR process starts, as you know, but also at the regional and global levels. The second thing is that it promotes sort of a holistic approach to monitoring and accountability of various UN human rights frameworks, for example, the United Nations Charter on Rights of the Child, the African Charter, but also the UPR, as well as national legislation. And it sort of links child rights and the SDGs. It also provides tips, really practical tips on how to engage children in the whole entire VNR cycle. And finally, and this is important, it does provide guidance on how organizations can report meaningfully on the pledge to leave no one behind. And this is something I feel very passionately about, because as you know, perhaps the most transformative principle within the 20 Agenda is this promise that governments have made that that progress on the SDGs has to be inclusive. Not only that, it has to reach the furthest behind first. So here is the SDG accountability cycle. I've simplified it here for the purpose of this presentation, but it has 5 distinct steps or milestones. So if you think about it, it's sort of like you're on a journey and there are different stops along the journey. But yes, so this is the sort of the cycle that we have proposed. The first, but before that, I just want to take a step back and to say, I firmly believe from my perspective that the process around the VNR is just ultimately as important as the report itself. And I say this for sort of 3 main reasons. Oops, sorry, it's stopped sharing, has it? Has it stopped sharing, Agnes? Or is still
no,
okay?
It's still okay.
Okay. And the first is around the challenges we face today require a whole require partnerships among all stakeholders. And indeed, the 2030 agenda envisions a whole of society approach. The second point is around the inclusiveness of the process determines ultimately whose views are reflected in that final report that are presented in New York, and conversely, those who are excluded. And finally, the process also determines how progress on the SDGs is measured ultimately in your country. We know that national averages, for example, can mask huge disparities at the community level. So for example, progress on education for a child that lives in a capital city looks very different from the experience of education for a child in a refugee settlement. So we are proposing a framework for the SDG accountability cycle, like I said, covering 5 distinct milestones in a year. And this framework builds on over 30 years of best practice in child rights reporting on the UNCRC, African Charter, etc. And so ideally, children should be involved in all stages of the cycle. For example, in the preparation phase, when countries first announce their intention to conduct a VNR, children should be involved in planning what they would like to do, supported through capacity building activities on the SDGs as well as child rights and how those two connect, and be part of any stakeholder mapping exercise. In sort of the second stage of that, this is where we complementary or shadow reporting phase. Children should be consulted for their views, but equally can lead the research as we have heard from the children in El Salvador and Ethiopia today, and do their own data collection. And sort of the third phase, which is the targeted advocacy phase. Children should be supported to speak directly to policymakers, whether it's presenting the findings of their report or perhaps through the media. The fourth sort of step in this process is, of course, the HLPF, which is the big global event every year where young people, different stakeholders gather together to review progress on the SDGs globally, but also regionally and nationally. This is a critical entry point for child participation, both in the VNRs that are presented to all countries, but also in events like today that we are hosting. And finally, in the follow-up and monitoring after HLPF, children should be supported to continue to hold governments to account on the commitments that they have made at the HLPF and in their country's VNR. I'm trying to get to the next slide. How do I? Oops. So finally, so building on that framework, the guide then goes into sort of step-by-step kind of tips on how to best take advantage of the SDG accountability framework. And there are 8 main steps. I won't go into too much detail today, but the first one is really around, the first step I would say is when you are planning how to engage in the VNR cycle, it's so important to assess the national context. So what I mean by this is, how are the SDGs being implemented in your country? What is the state of play per se currently? Who is ultimately the body or the organization or the ministry that is responsible for SDG delivery? Sometimes it can be the Prime Minister's office. Sometimes it sits with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, sometimes with the National Planning Ministry, etc. But it's important to know who is ultimately responsible for SDG delivery. It's also important, I think, to assess, okay, what are some of the progress that has been made? What are some of the policies already in place? And then it's also important to, I think, define clearly what the objectives are for your organization for the VNR cycle. Now, it may be one of those, it may be that you want to make sure that children's voices are included, or it may be that you want to ensure that the government reports on left behind groups. So regardless of what your objectives are, it's so important to define that from the start and be very clear with what you want to achieve. And the second one is around building a coalition. And here I would really encourage organizations that are keen to engage in the VNR cycle to work with partners on the ground. You know, if you're a child rights organization, team up with human rights organizations, organizations working on climate change, organizations working on poverty reduction, etc. Particularly in the context of a shrinking civic space, building on each other's strengths, sharing of data, sharing of best practices is so important. The third is around having national dialogues and data collection. So typically governments do invite stakeholders to be part of the national dialogue in the VNR process. So it's very important to participate in that, but also equally to be part of the data collection or to supply data if available. And then the fourth step, like I said, I alluded to it earlier, but it's around complementary reporting or shadow reporting or spotlight reporting, as sometimes called. And this really is the backbone of advocacy. This kind of reporting, it has been done a lot in human rights sort of circles. It's also being done in SDG work now. And it's so important because it provides an independent account of where civil societies or where children see there are gaps in progress and what the recommendations are. So this, I think, would take the majority of your time throughout the year. But when you do have a draft and you've collected and analyzed the data, equally important is to do validation. And this should also include children in that process to make sure that the report that you've produced indeed is in line with the views of the children in the country. With that report, you can now move on to the sort of the sixth step, which is having with having advocacy with the state. I know that national contexts differ. Sometimes it may be quite open dialogue. Sometimes it may be quite a restricted space, but just assessing where the opportunities are to sort of have advocacy with the state prior to the high-level political forum. On the high-level political forum, I just wanted to say that, yes, national governments do attend, but civil society has an official seat at the table through what is called the major groups and other stakeholders. And that is that functions at the national level, but also regional and global level. And children are part of the major groups and other stakeholders. And finally, I think it's important to stress that SDG accountability doesn't end at the high-level political forum. Indeed, it's an iterative cycle, just like child rights, it's accountability and monitoring is an iterative cycle. So ultimately, when you return from New York or your capital, it's so important that you do continue to press for change and press for the necessary inclusive progress for all children in your national context. And with that, I'll pass over to Agnes.
Thank you so much, Lily. I think this tool will be extremely useful to all of us engaging in the VNR to be able to make sure that we properly engage in each of the steps. So thank you so much for presenting the tool. And then I pass over to Mary.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and thank you for this opportunity. So I'm also going to share one of the other guidance document, which is based on the case study from Zambia, in terms of sharing how to support a child-led complementary report for a VNR process. As you heard from our permanent secretary, Zambia reported in 2020, apart from the civil society coalitions that reported, Save the Children and partners, Panos Institute for Southern Africa, Advocacy for Child Justice and Media Network did facilitate a process where child-led researchers were able to collect their own views and perspectives on the implementation of SDGs in Zambia. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, so basically what was the process? So just for the sake of this event, I'll just run down through the process that the children of Zambia sort of went through in supporting a child-led report. So as said, what is very critical is to prepare the children. So the preparation for the child-led report, there was adult intervention, meaning, as I mentioned, Save the Children and the 3 civil society organizations had to, orient the children, prepare them for for what sustainable development goals are and what is a VNR process. So that was a very critical process. And the selection of these children that wrote the child-led complementary report came from civil society, and the selection was based on interest, but also children represented from the different provinces of Zambia. So really covering all the 10 provinces of Zambia. I must mention that the second step where the Zambian children took is that the whole process, designing the tools, consulting with children, it was designed by them. And I'm happy one of the young person that was part of these 10 children is actually on this call. So after we oriented them as Save the Children and our partners, the 10 children were able to devise their own systems, including different methods, consultative processes, including photos. They were collecting photos, they collected videos, they collected voice, and they also did face-to-face dialogue. That was focus group discussions with the children to collect information. And they also, without adult facilitation, they were able to draft their own report, and they were able to validate that report. So the child-led complementary report was developed by children through the different consultation process that took place. The children were also able to consolidate the findings and also validated. They went back to their constituencies, meaning the areas where they're coming from, different provinces, rural and urban areas of Zambia. And they went back and shared the views and covered all the views and perspectives on Zambia's progress towards the SDGs. After that, they also had an opportunity, and as Lile also mentioned in the other two, to actually dialogue with stakeholders. And the PS actually alluded to that earlier. So children held, radio discussions, they held face-to-face dialogue, and even virtual meetings, because I must mention that the process for Zambia was actually happened in 2020 at the height of COVID. So the children couldn't even meet physically. They had virtual meetings where they were able to share opportunities, present the progress with different stakeholders, including government. And suffice to say that the Zambian delegation included a child representative who was able to share their own perspective without any interference whatsoever from our government. They were able to share their own reflection in terms of the process and what they felt that the government needed to do to address the SDG progress, and also where there was no progress or where there were gaps in implementation. Apart from that, the children also participated at the high-level political forum. And this high-level political forum is where they presented the actual report together with our government delegation. But after that, they also, as civil society with the three partners, were able to facilitate follow-up meetings with our government, where they were able to share now reflections and opportunities, including what the government already alluded to. Children were invited even to contribute to the development and input in the 8th National Development Plan to see how they can track progress. And some of the issues that the children raised around education, access to children living with disabilities, some of these government has also taken on board and are implementing because of that dialogue that was held after the high-level political forum, and also the follow-up process, which in Lile's tool was also highlighted. So basically, this is the process, but allow me also to just share briefly some of the tips or lessons learned that the children from Zambia have had since going through that process. So in terms of tips, what is critical is really to work with what you already have. So as mentioned, children from Zambia were able to write their own independent report without very minimal adult support and giving their own perspectives. And this can be reflected by the fact that we were able to use existing civil society coalitions and structures. So our partners have networks, and those networks were able to mobilize children. Apart from that, there are also opportunities to work within existing structures, government structures like schools, children's rights clubs, children councils, where children were mobilized within those structures. So you don't have to invent a parallel structure for the sake of getting views from children, but otherwise you work with existing structures. It is also important, I think learning from the children from Zambia, it's very important that the children actually are facilitated using child-friendly tools to understand the SDGs. And also for them, as they're collecting data from other children, they need to use child-friendly language, allow different methodologies or data collection modes. Like I said, they use face-to-face, they use voice, they use WhatsApp, they use different methods, TV programs. They were able to collect voices from different children. And also, like as we've seen from our young people from Ethiopia and El Salvador, this is very important. It gives children the unadulterated feedback to actually provide to their government their perspectives and also their progress towards achieving children's rights, because as sustainable development goals, as the children already spoke to, they are linked directly to children's rights and implementation of child's rights commitment. So therefore, it's very critical that we give children these platforms and also obviously taking care of the safeguarding concerns. And finally, it's very important to have follow-up process, follow-up engagement. And I'm happy that our government also committed to increase that space for child participation, not just youth, because children are very critical. They also need to be part of the process. Sometimes we leave the children behind and focus on the youth, because the children's issues, as Akram shared, are different. So it's important that that is taken into consideration. So for the sake of just highlighting the tools, I will end here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share. Over to you, Agnes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. It's great to hear this excellent experience that you had in Zambia, and to hear as well all the results, all the work that the children put into doing research, analyzing the situation, developing the complementary report, and then presenting it to the state, and actually seeing results afterwards and how these have been taken into account. So congratulations. I believe it's very important to document all these examples, and I believe we will have as well amazing examples coming from El Salvador and Ethiopia. So now, after we heard the presentation of these tools, we are moving to the Q&A section. So I would like to thank everyone who sent questions in advance. When you were registering to attend the event, you had the option to send questions in advance. So we have shared these questions with the children. And so now I'm going to move towards them to ask them to respond to these questions that we received in advance. And then if we have time, we will look at the questions that we have received today in the chat and the Q&A function, and also answer to those questions. So let's begin by some questions that we had for Arafat and Ekram. So Arafat, we received a question asking, what did you learn from being part of the VNR process in your country?
Thank you. Thank you, Agnes, for giving the second golden chance. Thank you. This is the first time of me and for us in Ethiopia to take part in a child-led VNR. Being part of the VNR was a great opportunity, and I have learned a lot of process. Those are the first one. I have got a chance to understand about the VNR process, deeply VNR process, I understand. And also, I have learned a lot of about sustainable development goals, what they are, how they are linked to our rights. And also, I was able to see how different programs in a place in our community were aiming to tackle some of this challenge. Second, I have learned about the need of different vulnerable children in my region, such as the need of children on the street, children with disability, children in internal displaced people. Third, it also helped me build my confidence. And after we produced the child-led report, I had a chance to share the children's voice on high-level advocacy event in a Somali regional state, in the presence of government officials, including health advisor of the regional health bureau, head of regional sector office from 5 bureaus, and also 6 regional parliaments. And also this event or this meeting motivates me and also leads to get strong confidence to forward my experience. Finally, I also got a better research skill through leading child lead research on sustainable development goal, and I can use this skill in my future at school or whatever as a child parliamentary. So thank you, Agnes, and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arafat, and also for showing how this, will help you, as you're saying, in the future. These are the skills that you have learned and that, you will use beyond the VNR process. So, Ikram, I have also a question for you. What are the necessary support to give to children's parliaments as stakeholders in ensuring the realization or the actualization of children's rights? So what do you think is the support that should be given to children's parliaments? Over to you.
Okay, thanks for this question, Agnes. I want to start first by starting why it is important to have the children's parliament in country based on my experience as a child parliamentarian in Ethiopia. In our country, the children parliament have been provided an important space for us to be consulted and participate in initiatives regarding matters that affect us now and for our future. It is a place for us to get a better understanding on these matters and share our opinion and voice in a formal and informal way. We are also make the connection back to all children in our communities and support them to understand and engage in programs and initiatives that are important for them. In order to ensure that we can contribute in a meaningful and effective way in the actualization of children's rights, I think it is important to receive acceptance and recognition by all stakeholders and to be supported by law to have our own agency. Build child parliament members and leadership capacity through training, coaching, experience sharing. This capacity building needs to be on specific matters like children's rights and SDG process, for example, but should also be on general skills like research, communication, policy, and advocacy skills. It is important for us to be given access to relevant data and information in a child-friendly formats, so we can be empowered to engage in the conversations. It is important to engage the children parliaments in the policy and strategic platforms, initiatives and design, as well as in budget-related decisions. This will not only enable us to share our perspective to create better policies and strategies, but it will also give us practical experience to better contribute to conservation and decision making in the future. Once children parliaments are set up, it is important to ensure they are supported on practical things like resources for logistic and facilities to regularly meet, move around and engage in activities. We need this to identify the needs of all children from different areas, groups, and advocates for their rights. Finally, it is critical to support the strengthening and expansion of the children parliaments, not just at a national level, but also at subnational and district levels. This is really important to ensure that children opinion and voice are coming from all regions and are representatives or representatives of all children groups, their realities and needs. This is my answer. Thank you, Agnes.
Thank you thank you so much, Ikram. I think it's excellent to hear all these recommendations that I think can be not only useful for the children's parliament in your country, but for any children's parliament in any country. So thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn over to Oliver and Brenda. So Oliver, I have a question for you. What is your favorite SDG and why?
Bueno, mi ODS favorito es el ODS número 4, el de educación de calidad. Logrando este objetivo podemos disminuir la pobreza, lograr erradicar el hambre. Además, educando a buenos doctores podemos lograr salud y bienestar. Para esto necesitamos buenos profesores que nos eduquen con calidad y paciencia.
Mil gracias, Oliver. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for showing us how important this SDG is and how interrelated it is to other SDGs. And now let's move to Brenda. So Brenda, I also have a question for you. Some children experience discrimination based on their sex or skin color, place of origin, and other status. So the question that we received is, how can we ensure that those children who experience discrimination can participate in this type of consultations and processes?
Muchas gracias por el espacio. Todas somos importantes, todas y todos somos importantes y tenemos los mismos derechos y somos iguales, sin importar nuestra orientación sexual, sexo, raza o etnia. Todas y todos pertenecemos a la sociedad, por lo que merecemos el mismo respeto y ser vistos como personas diversas, con los mismos derechos y capaces de realizar cualquier actividad, capaces de participar en espacios importantes, de hablar por nosotros mismos y por los demás. Es importante en ese tipo de consulta tomar en cuenta la opinión de todas y todos estos niños y niñas que viven en diferentes contextos. Por ende, debemos brindar información que ayude a orientar sin importar sus edades, para que sepan identificar situaciones de violencia y discriminación que ocurren a sus alrededores y que vulneran sus derechos. También para que dejen de ver a la violencia como algo natural o como educación o disciplina, ya que sabemos que eso no es cierto. Así desarrollar sus capacidades y habilidades que ayuden a evaluar, reflexionar y tomar una valoración de nuestra sociedad de una manera crítica, colectiva e individual. De igual forma, debemos brindarles espacios de participación importantes para desarrollar su liderazgo, en donde podrán ser la voz de más niñas y niños quienes hablarán desde sus realidades reales, ya que la niñez y la adolescencia también puede opinar acerca de los ODS y su desarrollo. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for these powerful words. It's great to hear from you and also from Oliver, Arafat, and Ikram, all the suggestions and recommendations that you have, and the importance that to create these spaces to be able to hear directly from you all your views and recommendations. So I think we have time for a few more questions among those that we have received today through the chat. So I will ask the following questions. First, one addressed to Lily and another addressed to Mary. So Lily, we have been asked, how can civil society organizations support governments to increase the participation of children from marginalized backgrounds in BNR processes? That one is for you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Agnes. I think to the colleagues on the call today, I think civil society is an invaluable partner within the 2030 agenda. We bring expertise, we bring our own data, we bring etc. And really ground experience working with marginalized communities. Indeed, governments do struggle to ensure that different groups and more marginalized children are included in the process. So I would say we can partner with governments, civil society should partner with governments in the VNR process. Sometimes that can be facilitating, for example, the dialogues. But also, I think it's important to realize that about a third of the SDG targets can only be achieved at the local level. So partnering with our local partners is so important to ensure that these groups are also included, and it's not just the big national organizations and sort of those groups that are included in the process. And I think finally, the other point is that civil society has a really important role to continue to push for accountability, that we want to see the process that is not just inclusive, but participatory. We want all groups, because that is how we make sure ultimately that every last child is counted in SDG progress and in the VNRs.
Thank you so much, Lily. And then we have another one for Mary. Regarding the child-led VNR in Zambia, the colleagues are asking, what mechanisms did you use to make sure that the process of selecting the 10 child researchers was an inclusive process and was as inclusive as possible? Then they also asked, did this include children with disabilities, and what were the areas of focus of the child-led report?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those. So in responding to the inclusion, how inclusive was the process in Zambia? I must mention that in my preamble, I shared that these children were selected by other children from the different structures that they represented, mobilized by civil society. And so this was a very transparent process. But I must mention that out of the 10 children that were part of the child-led researchers, there were children from rural and urban areas of Zambia. There were also children that were living in very vulnerable cities or towns of Zambia. So they were able to reach, get the perspectives and interview children living with disabilities, children living on the streets, children, migrant children. So they were able to have focus group discussions with these children to just get their perspective. So there was a direct inclusion, and to ensure the perspectives of all these children that would ordinarily be left behind was also covered. And also we did ensure that through the process of orienting them, I think some of those inclusion criteria were shared with the children. So they were able to ensure that that perspective was also included in their tools that they developed. And also even in the picture, when you look at the pictures from the actual detailed series, you'll see that there were actually children living with disabilities that were, who gave their perspectives, especially on access to education, access to disability-friendly facilities, which the children were able to share directly. Even for the dialogue, they were able to share directly with the government duty bearers in those districts where they were called on the platforms, where they're radio, to actually interact with children and get the perspective directly from the children that were affected, especially those that were likely to be left behind. Yeah, I hope I've sort of responded to both, but I've tried also to respond in the chat directly.
Yes, thank you so much, Mary. It's impressive to see how inclusive the process was and really led by children to select their representatives. I think we still have a couple of minutes for the Q&A. So actually, we have selected another question, and this is an open question for any of you to answer. So we received a question saying, how do we advocate for children's rights, child right to equality in a patriarchal environment culture? So I don't know if this is a question that you would like to take, if you have any tips to share with us. I can copy again the question in the chat. So I don't know if we would like to use these 2 last minutes that we have for the Q&A to respond to this question. Let me know if any of you would. I see Mary. Would you like to go first?
Yes, so I think it's very critical that I would give the examples of from Zambia. I think we do have children that came from the eastern part of Zambia, which is affected by some of the issues of child marriage. The children were able to use the perspectives that they collected from other children in terms of social cultural norms that were affecting the ability of girls first to go back to school, or even just the stigma that they suffered in the patriarchal communities. And they were able to share that directly with the Ministry of General Education, then Ministry of General Education, to just give the perspective to say, how do you address some of these challenges, including discussing with traditional leaders on radio programs, and also sharing the actual perspective anonymously in terms of what they got from the field in terms of discussing with children. That would be sort of the quick example I could mention from Zambia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. That's great to hear. Do we have any other colleagues that would like to add to an answer to this question?
Agnes, am I allowed to also participate?
Yes, sure. Please go ahead. Yes.
All right. Trevor Kaunda here again. I've been in the meeting just to appreciate the comments that are coming through from our young friends, and I'm impressed with the level of contributions and sharing of experiences. But just touching on the subject that you raised about how to support and protect child rights in patriarchal societies, as Mary has said, and I do believe coming from a government perspective, one of the important issues is legislation, firstly. How do we ensure that these rights are recognized at law? So in the constitutions, those rights have to be expressed, and in subsidiary or secondary laws, that also has to reflect. And then beyond that, the partnership with various stakeholders, government, the civil society, the traditional leadership, are raising awareness around protection of child rights. And as been said in the Zambian scenario, we now do have across the traditional leaders, those that are champions of protection of child rights, and participation of the children in various forums. It is increasing by the day. One thing that digitization has taught us, and access to the internet, is connectivity with the global community. So our young children, even if they are repressed or in a patriarchal society, they do connect with their friends who are in different societies, and they are seeing how their colleagues in the rest of the world are enjoying their rights. And these are things that they now bring home and fully express themselves, knowing fully well that there are others who are ahead of them when it comes to expression of child rights. So access to digital platforms is also another way of ensuring that you put into practice what is legislated. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Trevor. It's great to hear as well the perspective from the government, and it's encouraging to hear, the importance, as you mentioned, the importance of working with, traditional leaders that now are champions themselves on child rights, the importance of putting all this in law, and to make sure that this is after translated into practice. So on this note, and if no one else would like to speak, we can close our Q&A here. Thank you, a big thank you to all of you for sharing your views, sharing all these amazing good practices. A big thank you especially to Arafat, Ikram, Brenda, Oliver. It's amazing to hear from you and all the work that you have been doing in country to put together your child-led complementary report. I look forward to read them once they are available. And I think we all were amazed by your interventions. And now I would like to give the floor to Professor Benjamin Mesmour. He's a member of the UNCRC committee, professor of law at the University of the Western Cape, and visiting fellow at the Human Rights Program, Harvard Law School. And Benjamin, you have the floor for opening remarks, for closing remarks. Apologies.
Yeah. No worries. Thank you very much. It's been such a treat. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to all the inputs. In fact, if I only had 10 seconds, I would have said, I just simply agree with what the children have said. Ikram, Arafat, Oliver, and Brenda, and I would have left it at that. Now, let me just say a few things as far as the Committee on the Rights of the Child is concerned. We review the state parties' reports that are submitted to us, and we give recommendations to those states. When the SDGs were adopted, we actively engaged with the process. We try to provide inputs, but more critically, within the Committee on the Rights of the Child, we have a working group that is focused on the SDGs. Now, if you look at the recommendations that we've been giving states since the adoption of the SDGs, you see that there is a standard paragraph that asks states to look at the link between the SDGs and the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and in doing so, to make sure that the implementation of the SDGs takes into account children's participation. It's a recommendation that we give to all states, and we have seen some examples how a number of states are paying close attention to that recommendation. One of the things that came to my mind as I was listening to the presentations was, as a committee, we also submit, we make a submission to the high-level political forum almost every year, taking into account our experience based on our engagement with the children, particularly our engagement with states. One thing that came to my mind, ideally, with the finances being available and the opportunities being available, we should actually learn and even make an effort in our next submissions to bring in children's voices into the submissions that we make as the Committee on the Rights of the Child. In a way, it's also a practical way of holding ourselves accountable. As we all know, when the Convention on the Rights of the Child was drafted, it did not benefit from children's direct participation, but the drafters had the foresight, had the appreciation to know that children's participations and their views are critical. That's why it's provided as a right. So the Committee on the Rights of the Child, or the civil society organizations, or UN agencies, or more importantly, states, when they give the opportunity to children to participate, they're not doing children a favor. They're actually upholding children's rights, and that's an issue that we should always pay close emphasis to. Now, I just want to highlight a few points, substantive points that came from the conversation. All the children made the point that child participation is absolutely critical. I cannot overemphasize that. It's absolutely critical. It's not just only the smart thing to do, it's the right thing to do, and we learn from it as we engage through the process. The second point that I just want to highlight, which is a point that Brenda, to a certain extent, significantly underscored when she said that we need to be seen as being diverse. And Oliver also emphasized the point when the point was made about the color of our skin or nationality or gender, irrespective of those, that we actually need to push the boundaries. That's a clear understanding that children are not a monolithic entity. They're not the same category. We need to be able, when we talk about children, we need to be able to differentiate between those that are relatively older, those that are actually younger, adolescents, and so forth. So that differentiation is absolutely important, and that's a recommendation for all stakeholders. The second point that I just want to highlight is the cross-cutting nature of the SDGs has also come out very clearly. Arafat, for instance, talked about poverty and hunger. When the decision was made to separate poverty and hunger from the MDGs, moving to the SDGs, it's not because there is no link between them. There is significant link between them. And we need to be able to place very close emphasis as we move forward with the implementation. So that's an important lesson that we need to keep at the back of our mind. The point about reaching the furthest behind first was made. In fact, Ikram, when she spoke about IDPs and children in conflict and children with disabilities, that was one of the points that she actually emphasized. That is a point that we, as the Committee on the Rights of the Child, try to get across to states that come before us, that it shouldn't just only the low-hanging fruits that we're trying to reach. Actually, leaving no one behind should also mean reaching the furthest behind first. And it's a point that we need to emphasize time and again. Now, one of the important points that comes from this is that the role that child human rights defenders play, it's absolutely critical. There is a decision by the Secretary General that the Secretary General would issue a guidance note on child mainstreaming. And we want to see that process benefit from child participation itself. At the end of the day, engaging in the high-level political forum, engaging in the VNR process, and making sure that child participation takes place should not just only be for a select number of civil society organizations, or should not just only be for a select number of UN agencies, or should not just only be for a select number of countries. It should be a responsibility and even a privilege for countries ranging from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe. So that is A to Z. As a final point, a point was made about Malala, Greta Thunberg. I want to add Vanessa Nakate from Uganda, who's helping to push the boundaries on the climate conversation, or Francisco Vera from Colombia. And I see those traits and capacities in all the children that actually participated here, and those that are probably listening to this call, and those that are actually in their own homes, spaces, and so forth. If given the opportunity, they can actually help us to learn, they can actually help us to hold ourselves accountable, and they can help us to create a world that is fit for children, taking into account both the Convention on the Rights of the Child, but also the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and over to you, Agnes.
Thank you so much, Beniam. And with these great concluding remarks, nothing much to add from my side. Just a big thank you to all of you for joining us today, for sharing your perspectives. But before you go, I just need to share some next steps forward regarding the How to Tool series and the dissemination of the tools that you've seen today. So, just a reminder, these tools are made for you to use, to disseminate. Please share them with everyone, use them, and give us feedback on these tools. We want to improve them. So please get in touch with us, and we will just share a link in the chat box with a small survey to get feedback from all of you on this event and how to improve this type of events. So just my final thank you, and the thank you from all the partners and co-organizers, to all of you for being here today, and to all the speakers, and especially Arafat, Ikram, Oliver, and Brenda. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've done amazing. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Many, many thanks.
Everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice day.
Okay.
Everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Adiós, Oliver y Brenda. Excelente. Muy bien.
Felicidades a todos.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Adiós.
Adiós.
Adiós.